Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. A special edition here with a special guest, Dr. Theo de Jager from SAAI, which is South Africa Agriculture something. I'm going to let him tell you about that because a lot of people don't know what it is. Welcome to the program. You did see just that we started the program. The outset on the screen was a URL for the organization. If you're interested in learning about it or joining it, that link will take you there. I will put it up again during the broadcast a few times. And I want to thank Dr. de Jager. A friend of mine asked me if I would show me a video that he did last week, I think it was, and said, do you know this guy? I'm like, yeah, no, I know him. I've just never had a chance to talk to him. And so anyway, long story short, we got into contact and Dr. de Jager was like, yeah, Chris, I know who you are. Happy to come on the program. Since then, all hell has broken loose. Sorry for the H-double-E hockey sticks there, H-E double hockey sticks used there. But my goodness, Dr. Theo de Jager, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you join me today.
Good afternoon, Chris, and what a privilege to share your platform. Thank you so much for that.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. Listen, I think you're aware that once upon a time, I too was a farmer, and I have deep respect for people who work the earth. I was a dairy farmer, so I think that's probably about the hardest it gets, other than farming in the Karoo. That's not so easy, but no, dairy farming is not easy. And now I'm a beekeeper, so I don't know if that's agriculture. I don't know if it counts as a farmer, but anyway, listen, it's crazy. You put a letter out, which I hope gets to President Trump, about the situation, and really it was asking for calm, in my view, and a voice of calm about what's going on, what benefits, what challenges there might be out there. Whereas a lot of people are being viewed in South Africa right now as betraying South Africans with their stance, either thanking Donald Trump or rebuffing his offers. It's crazy. I think your letter was the most balanced and spoke, I hate the phrase truth to power or whatever that is, but it really was, I think, the most honest. And I took your letter without your permission and I read it on air for people. And that thing just took off. People absolutely loved it. So a lot of people have found out about your letter because of that. Because the only place I could find it was on Facebook. And I have to tell you that, I'm sorry, but Theo, Facebook is for 12-year-old girls and Tani's with blue hair. I'm just saying. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about who you are, because not everybody knows who you are, okay?
Yeah, I'm a farmer in the northernmost province of South Africa. I farm in Limpopo, not far from the Zimbabwean and the Mozambican borders in the Lowveld. And I'm farming with subtropical fruits and timber. And I've spent a lifetime in organized agriculture. I've served on every level, from local farmers association up to international levels. So I've spent a lifetime organizing farmers.
Well, in fact, you have done that. And I think the letter, I don't want to overstate it here, but to me, it's kind of like a clarion call for calm and for consciousness and to be cognizant of what's going on here. So your organization, you have a grasp of how many folks it represents or how many members? Can you share it with us and tell us a little bit about SAAI?
SAAI is the Southern African Agri-Initiative. So we organize farmers across the SADC countries. We are also the biggest voice for farmers in Zimbabwe, both those who lost land since 2000 and also in Matabele land, mostly smallholder farmers. The Matabilis also really had a raw deal under the ZANU-PF government. SAAI is a network for family farmers. So our focus is on the smaller and medium scale family farming enterprises. And in our context in Southern Africa, a family farmer is not big or small or rich or poor or black or white or well-established or a newcomer to the industry. It's a family that makes a livelihood from the soils. We really spend a lot of our resources and our time on maintaining rural areas, small rural towns. And our big crusade is actually against the corporatization of farming, because if big companies start to do primary production, they don't use the local lawyer, the local bookkeeper in town, the local distributor of fertilizer or other inputs. They go directly to the big suppliers and they do their business in the cities. So we are kind of trying to push back against urbanization. And our main target is, of course, urban consumers. the most important people in our lives as family farmers are those mothers who walk into a grocery store to decide what the family will have for dinner tonight. And we are fighting the battle for the hearts and minds of those consumers, because we sit even in South Africa already with a second and sometimes a third generation of consumer in cities who no longer have a grandpa or an uncle on a farm. And their experience of food ends in front of a shelf in a shop. But the world behind that shelf is unknown to them. And they are starting to wrestling us about livestock, about cropping, about how we fertilize our harvests, what we spray to fight insects or to combat weeds, and how we treat pigs, what the accommodation of our livestock is all about. So we are trying to build a bridge all the time between consumers in cities and real life on a farm.
Well, Theo, I have to confess, I apologize. I mean, I have it on good authority from a member of parliament from the African National Congress that why do we need the farmers? Because we get our food at Pick and Pay.
I remember.
Actually said in Parliament, and a person, oh my gosh, I'll tell you, that says an awful lot about politics in general, but politics in South Africa in particular. All right, well, that helps out a lot because it's interesting. It's Southern Africa. It's not just South Africa you're focused on, and you focus on small holdings and family farms and such, which is what I had. We had a dairy farm, just 17 acres with Jerseys and Guernseys, mostly Jerseys. And I'll tell you what, 5 o'clock in the morning milking cows when it's minus 12 degrees outside is not a pleasant experience. But you get used to it. And so I'm glad you mentioned that because you mentioned Zimbabwe. I've been covering the story in Zimbabwe for decades. And as it unfolded in 2000, I was actually in Matabeleland when they were murdering farmers the very days that was happening. It was pretty shocking. And back then, the Commercial Farmers Union was the biggest organization representing farmers in Zimbabwe. From what I can see, it's around, but it's pretty much defunct at this stage. It doesn't have a lot going on. So it's good to see that somebody's looking out for the interest in Zimbabwe. Now, not to get in a food fight here, but another organization that deals with farmers in South Africa and represents them is Agra SA. Somebody just asked me a few moments ago, does anybody know why Agra SA fell off their trolley? I think that's a good phrase. They've kind of upset a lot of people, but you're not speaking for anyone other than your members, or are you speaking for other folks? Because a lot of people are attacking AfriForum and Solidarity, saying that who are they to speak for Afrikaners? I don't know that that's a statement you're making. I think you're just making a rational statement about what goes on with farming. Did I misrepresent anything there?
I can never claim that I speak for all farmers, but I do claim that I speak for more farmers than anyone else. The same in Zimbabwe, and we now have a close relationship with the CFU in Zimbabwe, but it was not always like that. There's a very good reason why SAAI very quickly became the largest voice for farmers in Zimbabwe. You see, there are really only two kinds of farmers' organizations in the world, and that goes for every country. There are those organizations who are better at bringing the voice of governments to the farmers, and those who are better at taking the voice of the farmers to governments. And it's a different kind of skill you need. It's a different attitude. When the issue of family farmers exploded in the northern parts of Europe, when it happened in the Netherlands, the National Farmers Organization was nowhere to be seen. When there were television interviews with these thousands and thousands of farmers who took their tractors onto the highways and the streets and cities, they spoke to common farmers. When the same thing happened in Germany, the Deutsche Bauernverband was right in the middle of it, in the thick of things. You want to speak to the farmers? You speak to the president of the National Farmers Association. And of course, he was not popular with his government. And contrary to what they expected there, when they had a poll in Berlin, speaking to urban people about these tractors who is clogging up the traffic in the streets of Berlin, they found that more than 80% of the urban folks had sympathy with them. You say that you have some experience of being a farmer. You know, family farming is the oldest profession in the world. There was a time when everybody were farmers. We can only today be lawyers and architects and teachers because there are still enough of us who are farming. It's also still today the biggest profession in the world. And I dare say it is also today the best organized profession in the world, right from international level and structures down to village-based and valley-based local farmers associations.
Well, I don't want to dispute your point, but I always thought that ladies of the night was the oldest profession. I'm just saying.
Yeah. They had to eat.
Fair point. Fair point. You're right. They did have to eat. They couldn't just ply their trade without eating. Yeah, no, exactly. Farming is incredibly old, if not the oldest profession in the world. And it's interesting you bring up the topic of the farm protest that took place in Europe, because a lot of people were caught off guard by that, particularly European politicians, which never should have happened. The common agricultural policy is really the common death of agriculture policy, in my view. The attempt to limit farmers or decide what they can grow, put quotas on it, and really disrupt farming in Europe, which is absolutely insane. If you can produce things effectively and efficiently, you should produce them, whether it's turnips or it's producing gold, whatever you can produce. And that's been attacked for a long time. But it is interesting you bring up the case, because UK was where people first started paying attention to it. I think in Germany, the Netherlands is huge because they're trying to limit the amount of urine and such and nitrogen it gets into the soil. But they completely ignore the impact of what people do in urban centers, raising global temperatures with these big heat sinks of urban centers and the traffic and the congestion, the sewage that's put out by cities, and attack farms. And here in America, one thing I definitely can say about farms is while the family farm doesn't have a lot of support in my view, farming in general does. We have massive lobbies and support groups and organizations, unions that represent farmers. And some of it, from my perspective, is actually detrimental because we still subsidize types of farming that benefit the large, industrial, wealthy commercial farmers at the expense of consumers first and then family farms second. Any take on that? Do you agree with that issue, or is that a similar situation in South Africa or no?
Yeah, all over the world, the family farmer is under siege. No matter where you go, big farmers are growing bigger and bigger, and smaller ones drop out of the industry because the economy of scale matters. It's like playing Monopoly. It always ends the same. You end up with one or two players around the board, and the rest are no longer playing along. And yet, it is family farming that maintains our rural spaces. That is the heartbeat of small towns, but it's about something more than that. I had the privilege to visit farmers in 86 countries when I was the president of the World Farmers Organization, and not in the cities. I had the privilege of going out to the farms and see them where they work the land. And whether you go to Russia or the USA, to Argentina or Germany, to Kenya or South Africa or New Zealand, farmers are always the more conservative part of society. Not necessarily politically conservative, but often that too. Not necessarily religiously conservative, but very often that too. Conservative in terms of family values, because a family on a farm is a different kind of structure than a family in the city. They still eat together. They spend a lot of time together. They share responsibility. It's a much closer knit entity. Children who grow up on a farm has a different view on life than children who were raised in cities. Probably because they also see death. Where do you see that in cities? It happens in hospitals, clinics, and so on.
East Philadelphia. Sorry.
They understand the cyclical nature of life. And I have been accused in Rome at one of the meetings of the Commission for Food Security that trying to stop this trend of urbanization, trying to revive rural areas, trying to set up agriculture as a viable career opportunity for bright young minds is like trying to block the waves of the sea with your bare hands. But I don't think so. And there are enough farmers in the world who also do not think so. If we can stand together shoulder by shoulder, I think we can block the sea, the waves off the sea with our bare hands. We must just fight for a rightful place for your small and medium-sized land-based enterprise, the family farmer. If I always say, if you think of us in SAAI, in my home organization, think of a name of a farm and a family on a gate post on a dirt road, which brings a family and a piece of land together. The most special thing about a family farmer is that the horizon is never the end of the next financial year, not even the next decade. Family farmers always think in terms of the next generation and even the one after that. And it is less about what I've inherited from my father or my grandpa. It's more about what I borrow from my children and my grandchildren.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the family farm in this respect, because the African National Congress made a statement a few years ago that they needed a land reform, land restitution, all of which is a whole can of worms. We'll talk a little bit about this in conversation, because it's mostly a passive lies what's been happening and failures by the government, in my view. But they've talked about they want to move 1 million black South Africans onto farming. But they're talking about subsistence farming, which is different than small holdings in my perspective. I mean, if you have a hectare and you're growing cabbage, that doesn't make, it's not a viable living. You got to have a little more land than that in order to do something. It's crazy because the number of people that are in farming has been dwindling around the world. Urbanization, mechanization on farming in particular. Also, and soon we'll have robotics. They'll have the drones out fertilizing the crops and and seeding areas and stuff like that. Reduces the need for labor, but there'll always be a need for some labor. But the point is that while most of the world has gone towards fewer farmers by going more mechanized, more and larger industrial scale farming, and increased productivity in many cases, the ANC wants subsistence farmers. And I've told people that, in my view, that's because you want people that are poor and impoverished. A subsistence farmer is not a way to survive. If you want to survive, the fourth industrial revolution is out there. Get your kids coding skills and AI skills and genes and communications and things like that. And you can still have people that farm, but you've got to have a viable holding. And it depends on what you're growing or what you're raising, how much that means. For instance, I mean, if you're in the Northern Karoo or if you're Northern Cape or somewhere in the Karoo, 10 hectares, you're not going to survive, no matter what you do, I don't imagine, unless you're picking fenbos, maybe you can do that. But I mean, in the KZN, you probably don't need thousands of hectares to grow sugar cane or maize or something like that. That's a very long and convoluted thing. I didn't mean to take you 10 different directions. My point here is that the bottom line here is the ANC wants people to be subsistence farmers. I think that your organization, it sounds like you want people to be successful farmers, and particularly your focus is on small holdings and medium-sized holdings. Did I get that right?
For sure. Although farming is the oldest profession, everything got turned on its head when the tractor and the implement were developed. And those who did not embrace the new technologies, they dropped out of the industry. But an even bigger shift is happening now with the digitalization of agriculture. The impact of big data, robotics, satellite and drone technologies, the Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, it changed everything we knew about agriculture and especially everything we do about it. And it's getting cheaper and cheaper, these technologies. Today, this technology enables us to make every drop of water count, every seed, every square inch of your fields or your orchards or your pastures. And if you don't do that, if you don't change the gears to precision farming, data-driven farming, data is the precision part of precision farming, you'll probably drop out of the industry because you cannot compete. Agriculture is a business. The paradigm of smallholder farming in Africa, and as it is being promoted, especially in the Rome-based agencies of the United Nations and the development aid agencies, it is a poverty trap. It is designed to keep people poor. There's only one way to go about it, and that is to commercialize it, to mechanize it, to to modernize it. So our approach to training in agriculture should change to these latest technologies. And either you are on the cutting edge of it or you fall behind. Once you fall behind, it's nearly impossible to catch up again. Now, to be very honest, I'm on the wrong part of 60. I'm not in the generation who have mastered the new technologies. But I find no bigger joy in my involvement in organized agriculture than the engagements with young farmers. Man, let me tell you, this industry have a great future because these young farmers with fingers who know small buttons on screens of smartphones and tablets, they are the ones who are breaking open new ways also of linking to markets and to win this battle for the hearts and minds of consumers. And agriculture in 5 or 10 years from now will be completely different because they are the ones who are taking over from my generation. And we must make it as easy as possible for them.
Well, you mentioned some very interesting things. I want to cover a couple points here very quickly about farming and technology and just the nature of farming. You know, growing up, excuse me, we have something in our high schools called Future Farmers America, FFA. And people who grew up on farms tend to be members of that. I lived on a farm, but I wasn't a member because there's a certain, I don't want to say a clique, but it was in high school. But these are people who focus on farming. We also have other groups like 4-H, which is a youth organization that teaches all kinds of things, and it's typically organized around agriculture. What I quickly discovered as a youth in dairy farming, and I've known throughout life, is that people look oftentimes down on farmers. They don't understand farming if they're not in it. They don't appreciate the hard work, the respect for the land. Farmers tend to be the best conservationists by and large because they're trying to protect the natural resources they have. They don't want to deplete the soil. We've learned skills over millennia on how to farm and how to crop rotate, and we just learn more all the time. But I've discovered that farmers are agronomists, they're meteorologists, they're business people who have to look long term. And unfortunately, far too often, people don't realize all the skills it takes to be a farmer. It's all just a farmer. And I want to use that to segue to something else, Theo. But before I do that, I want to tell an anecdotal story. And that is that in the Sahel in West Africa, many years ago, we discovered that a private organization discovered that they could improve crop production, but more importantly, it could improve life for semi-nomadic herders with goats and sheep, so they wouldn't denude the Sahel and it turns into desertification. What they did is they handed out free AM/FM radios that were hand cranked, so you didn't need batteries. It was no solar because they didn't have solar back then, so it was just hand cranked. And then they were able to listen to crop reports and able to listen to weather reports and also listen to the most important report, the price of mutton or the price of goat on the marketplace. And so you had a lot of people in Sahel didn't all show up at the same place at the same time in the same couple months every year to sell all their goats and all their sheep and depress the prices. They spread it out over the year and became much wealthier. My point is that farmers are clever, they adapt, they learn, they understand. And I think that's a critical point that a lot of people really miss here. And then the next thing I want to get to, I'll give you a chance to get back in here, is that one of the major problems, and we'll unpack this after you respond. Well, actually, let me get you to respond to that first, then we'll unpack the next piece. I don't want to get too far down the road. So would you agree, I'm pretty sure you agree, that farmers are very adaptive, very smart, and very much the antithesis of the stereotype that many people put on them?
Boer maak 'n plan. In Afrikaans, it says a farmer makes a plan. I think if one could put a logo or a slogan to family farming worldwide, that would be it. Every day you need to make a plan. You need to fix something. You need to battle against the weather, nature. Remember, agriculture is not in harmony with nature, and it never was. It was not intended to be. Because in agriculture, we need to produce surpluses. Nature will always try to seek balances. If there's too much of one thing, the opposite would come into play, and nature will seek balances. For us to produce surpluses, for us to feed cities, we need to produce massive surpluses. And that's why we do weeding in our fields and predation amongst our livestock. But I've not met a farmer anywhere in the world who does not have a very special relationship with nature. We know how delivered we are, and who would not bend backwards to accommodate nature and to preserve it and to promote it. No one is as vulnerable to nature than we are.
Absolutely. I want to do a quick admin here very quickly, folks. You're listening to Chris Wyatt Reports on the Wyatt Independent News Network. I'm live in central Pennsylvania. My guest today is none other than Dr. Theo de Jager, who is with SAAI in South Africa, and it covers Southern Africa for farmers and helps them out. He has been very clear about who he represents and doesn't try to claim he represents everybody, but he does know that he represents a lot of farmers and their interests. There was a question earlier about how you guys are backed and supported. I would presume it's from member dues. We'll get that in a few moments. But there was a question from Iceman, and I want to put two things up. The banner you're going to see up go in front of our screen right now is a link on the internet. You can type that into your browser or your phone if you want to learn more about SAAI, if you're interested in joining it. That's the English version. Naturally, if you speak Afrikaans, you can find the Afrikaans there, I'm sure. But the problem is, maar ek praat nie Afrikaans nie. maar ek verstaan. So, but not everybody does. So you can find it there. So that's where that's at. And there's a question from the Iceman. Folks, if you want to reach me, your best bet is to join one of the WhatsApp groups that we have. Henda will put the link up. The moderator or one of the other moderators will do that. Also, I don't really push my Twitter because Twitter is a toxic environment and I didn't like it. I've got probably more tweets than most people, and I've been a member for longer than most people on my current account. I've had previous ones. I've been there since about 2006, and until recently I had under 1,000 people follow me on Twitter, even though I have tens of thousands elsewhere. So if you would join me on Twitter, because the audience is growing there and the conversation is growing on Twitter now that it's mostly a free speech platform. I wouldn't say it's entirely free speech, but it's mostly a free speech platform. So please join me over there. I think Hendo's put the link up to that. Also, we have a community over there, Making South Africa Great, which I started recently. And that's as long as you're not a racist, a bigot, or a troll, you're welcome to join us over there. We're trying to promote topics. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in this conversation about macadamia nuts, and we'll talk about some other success stories in South Africa. But for the Iceman, if anyone's trying to reach me, join one of those groups or send me an email. But if you're sending me an email, I'll tell you, I am way behind on email because every time I try to take a nap, Donald Trump says something and I have more work to do. It just, the man keeps me busy 24 hours a day with all that's going on. So with that, let me get back to the point I want to get to a little while ago there, Dr. de Jager. And that is, South Africa's had land reform. And I'll do a quick encapsulation for my audience who doesn't know, and anything that you find in dispute, you're welcome to correct me on. So 1995, 1999, the government of South Africa opened a window for those who believe they were defrauded of land or property. Anyone can make a claim and lodge a claim. And that claim would be not just for you, but for your parents or grandparents going back to the year 1910. And that was an important date because before 1910, South Africa didn't exist. He's touching his mobile there. That's why. So you guys wonder why he's not trying to poke you in the eye. He's trying to keep his screen active because it keeps trying to go to sleep on him. So 1910 was the date that was agreed to at the Convention for Democratic South Africa, the negotiations for peace in South Africa after the end of the apartheid era. And so the agreement was that would be where land claims went. Everything before that is the sands of time, lost to history, conquest, colonization, combat, settlement. So it was a reasonable date. Now we have people trying to go back on that and claim they can go back to 1652 and claim land. Unfortunately, they don't want to go back to 1600 years to when the Nguni-speaking peoples crossed the Zambezi and then Limpopo rivers and invaded Southern Africa. But anyway, so that was the land claims. 75,000 plus land claims were filed from 95 to 99. The window closed. Over 74,000 of those land claims were long ago settled, usually as late ago as 20 years ago most recently. Some are contentious. They remain open. But then Jacob Zuma opened up a second window a few years back, and in that second window, another 141,000 land claims came. Most of them were duplicative. So that's the story of that. Now, the government of South Africa has been purchasing land on the willing buyer, willing seller basis ever since then. They have spent 58 billion rand. That is about $3 billion to purchase land in South Africa. They have purchased 3.9 million hectares of land in South Africa and distributed some of it. Much of it remains in government hands. Now, the reason I mention this, and it's a long story, but so not all my audience is in South Africa, not all of them, even South Africa, understand this story, Theo, is that of that land, much of it has been returned to people who have been ill prepared. No slight against the people who are claimants to get the land back, but they have no farming experience in many cases. They've been given no extension services, no training, no credit, no hardware, no implements, no seeds, no fertilizer, very little help except occasionally from some commercial farmers or small scale farmers who are their neighbors. And we see epic stories of disaster. For instance, in KwaZulu-Natal, we have the Don Valley Farm, which was productive 20 years ago. It's a disaster now. We also have near that the Ponderosa Farm, which is a dairy farm, which is completely gutted and destroyed. All the buildings just obliterated. There's no productive agriculture activity taking place there. Those are two anecdotal stories, but I can tell you dozens of those stories across the country. My point is this, is that there has been land reform. The government is lying to people and the media are lying to people, and they're also turning this into a racial issue. It's not a white and black issue. It's an elites issue and the misuse of government power. And I think I've opened up a can of worms there. I'm not sure how you want to respond to all that. It's quite a bit, but I'll give you a chance to jump in there.
2 weeks after I got elected the chairman of a local farmers organization, the very first land claims gazetted on our farms in the year 2000. So I've been intimately involved in the land reform process for the last 25 years. We have 3 tiers of land reform. The first is land claims or restitution. And just like you said, it's about those people who lost land because of apartheid, who are entitled to get it back. And the state buys those farms for them. But then there's also the land redistribution program, meant for people who do not have a land claim, but they are serious to enter into the farming industry, and government assists them to acquire land and to get them going in their farming enterprises. And then there's also a program for security of tenure for people who have been living on farms for years, often decades or generations, to give them security of tenure. They cannot just be thrown off or evicted from their houses. Now, in the land claims process, it is 27 years since the claims were filed, and still today we do not have a complete list of all the farms which have been claimed. Actually, we have no idea what our progress were, although the minister every year in a budget speech would report up to the decimal what the progress was. We have just won a court case against the Department of Agriculture last Thursday, in which we are trying to force them to take the complete list into the public domain. Because in the year 2000, the government answered in Parliament that they've received 63,000 land claims. Those are not 63,000 farms. One land claim, like the Makgoba claim in the valley where I farm, covers 775 farms. The Maupa claim around Mketsi covers 227 farms. Those were transferred to new structures called communal property associations, CPAs, which became a new tier of governance. Traditional authorities mostly filed the claims, but government would not strengthen the traditional authorities. They would rather set up these new structures. And now it's a nightmare to manage the conflict and the tension between communal property associations on the one hand and the claimants, the traditional authorities on the other hand. And we are far from done. If government says they have only 4 or 5% claims outstanding, it is a lie. For example, in my valley, they bought 42 farms for the Makhobas. What about the rest? What about the other 730 claims? They cannot just scrap it, because if they deemed one of those claims to be, or those farms to be a valid claim, all of them would be valid. Unfortunately, agriculture did not thrive on those farms. A vast majority of those farms have collapsed. Government failed to create a new class of profitable black farmers on those farms. Similarly, in the second pipeline of land reform, in the redistribution process, which we as commercial white farmers would prefer, it's much better to have a neighbor who is a serious farmer, who has the aspiration of being a profitable individual or family on the farm. It's much easier for him to make decisions on this farm than it is for a whole community. There they do not get the title deed for the farms. They are absolutely delivered to failure. I want to see an experienced commercial farmer make a success out of the kind of circumstances in which these beneficiaries need to make a success, because they cannot go to a bank. They don't have collateral to offer for production loans. And they are dependent on government to give them the funding for production purposes. One of our members notified us last week that at last he got the funding to plant some maize. But maize planting time closed in December already. He cannot plant anything now. And we assisted him to apply for this in 2021. What was he supposed to do on the farm between 2021 and now? If he did not have neighbors who assisted him with a little diesel here and some seed and fertilizer there, he would have had to abandon the farm. Government itself concedes that 90% of these farms have collapsed. I still want to see the other 10%. They should not have tried to manage land reform through a group of officials who are actually political activists. They should not have tried to manage land reform so close to government. They should have set up an agency which is an arm's length away from the hammer mill of party politics and the need to score political points. They should have managed land reform and farmer development as two sides of the same coin, making sure that an enabled farmer and a trained farmer gets a well-functioning farm. They should have made sure that they've set up structures and especially financial mechanisms to assist these farmers. They should have ensured that they managed land reform as a new asset to the South African nation and not a burden on it, because they had wide general buy-in. And a number of countries did do that. Taiwan was successful, Korea was successful, Germany was very successful. But alas, when there's a run-up to an election, every time there's a run-up to an election, we get a new land-based law, whether it was ESTA in 79 or the reopening of land claims in 2014, or expropriation without compensation, the promise to change our constitution in 2017, 2018. Land became the political play ball, and especially for a political party who has ran out of options and who has been caught with a poor hand. And then land reform, and especially expropriation without compensation, becomes the joker in the pack to play shortly before an election.
Those are great points you're making there. And I want to just for a second divert from our conversation, not to distract, but just to make a point here. First off, folks, thanks for tuning in. We've got about 1,500 people currently watching the program. Many of you are new here. You haven't been here before. I just want to be very clear about something. There's also a super chat from Congo Chris. Thank you for that. How do we encourage agricultural skills transfer? That's a good question. Let's come back to that. I'll save that for Theo after we get this. How do we encourage agricultural skills transfer? Let's put a pin on that and hold it. But I do need to talk about something very quickly here. And we're going to get to this a little bit later in the broadcast, but I'll bring it up now because the chat's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, please stop listening to people on YouTube and the fake news in South Africa, okay? The refugee program is not for farmers. It's for Afrikaners in South Africa who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. Now, before you start poking holes in that, you can define what an Afrikaner is of your own definition. I can define it. Boers can define it. It really doesn't matter what we have to say. It's what the State Department determines an Afrikaner is. And before you say, but wait, I'm colored, I'm Indian, I speak English, that's not fair to me. Take a deep breath. The program has not been released yet. The information on it, the standards will be released, and I expect that it will be expanded to a large group of people. But there is nowhere in the executive order, anywhere that says this is for farmers. It does not say that. That is fake news, and you're being told that by YouTube mamparas who don't have any idea what they're talking about and could not identify a place to plant a seed in the ground from their fourth point of contact. You know, the good Lord splits you on the backside there. So please do not listen to mamparas. You get the facts here, you get the truth here, and there's no reason, I have no dog in the fight to encourage you to come to America or discourage you to come to America. But these people in South Africa are spreading these rumors because they're not bothering to read this. If you don't believe me, check the receipts. The receipts are at the whitehouse.gov. Whitehouse.gov. Anybody on the planet, people in space and orbit can go there, search it on the internet, and you will find Donald Trump's executive order specifically directing how this is done and whom it affects. So let's not get carried away. I just want to make sure I got that out there. So it's not just for farmers. That will all come out soon enough. But, you know, you talk about something there, Dr. De Jager. One more question I had to address here, too, is that someone, Newsflash, said something about selling their tickets and selling, you're in the process of selling everything. Full stop. Stop right now, ladies and gentlemen. If you are trying to sell your things, I highly discourage you from doing that. Whoever you are, you don't have any information about whether you qualify, whether you'll be able to come here, what's going to happen, the reaction from the South African government. I would recommend calm and chill out, take a deep breath, and relax. Unless you're already in the process of selling everything anyway because you're abandoning in South Africa. Just don't do that. You might find yourself in a situation where you might have to wait 2 or 3 months, and now you're screwed. You have no house, you have no property, you have no bank account, you've cut up your credit cards. Now what are you going to do? Stand on the street corner? Just calm down, and you may change your mind. People make emotional decisions because things happening. And he answered the question about where you can live in, because I think Ulrich Venter said his parents or somebody lives here in the States. You can live wherever you like in America. We don't restrict people from living anywhere. The only thing that keeps you from living somewhere is how much money you do or do not have. There are houses about 5 kilometers from my house that cost $1.5 million. A beautiful neighborhood, bucolic countryside. I love it. I would love to live there. But I don't have $1.5 million for a house. So I live in a much more modest house about 5 kilometers to the east, closer to the highway, and I can hear the racetrack down the road at night with the noise. So, you know, you can live where you want. If you come as a refugee, you can ask to go to a certain place, but they will put you, so that we don't dump everybody in the same place, they'll put you where they decide, and you can move around on your own after that. Okay, so now back to Dr. De Jager. Sorry about that. Thank you for your patience, Dr. De Jager, but it was important to bring those things out before people go down a rabbit hole and make decisions that are going to be detrimental to their well-being. So you talk about no title deeds, and that's one of the things happening here. These land claimants oftentimes don't get title deeds. They're held by the government. And why would you need a title deed? Well, if you don't have title to the land, what collateral can you offer when you want to buy something on credit? You need to buy tractors or you need to buy new seed corn for the next year. If you have no capital, no property that you can pledge as collateral for the bank to repossess if you don't pay, then you're not going to get a loan. Now, the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters in South Africa, they want to take the farmland, but they want to hold on to it. They have no intention of giving title deed to farmers. They will control it like they're the boss. You go back to the days of the Nguni-speaking peoples wandering around Southern Africa with their cattle herds, and the chief is the one that decides who gets to put something here, who gets to go there. And if you fall out of favor of the chief, then you're marginalized or ostracized and put aside because you have no property rights. So as far as nationalizing things, the EFF wants to nationalize mines. They want to hold title to the farmland. But Dr. De Jager, we've seen how well that's gone for a state-owned enterprise like Eskom, once the world's best utility, now probably the world's worst utility, just 20 years later. South African Airways, the 21st century example of a dodo bird. That's a good example there. Transnet, Armscor, Denel, Airports Company, South Africa. These things just don't work. So anyway, I don't know if you want to comment on any of those things, but certainly back to the title deed, that's a major stumbling block for farmers, is it not? If you don't own the title to your property, it's almost impossible to operate a business, is it not?
It is. It is. Private property rights is the cornerstone of entrepreneurship and business and growth and job creation. Here now, neck of the woods in Africa, south of the Sahara, there are really only 4 countries where you can own farmland. It is here in South Africa and in Namibia and in small pockets of Botswana and Zambia. And this is the reason why the wealth of the soils, the wealth creating potential of agriculture on the African continent has not been unlocked. Africa has the potential to feed the world, and yet it is mostly dependent on the world to feed it. Private property rights has built economies across the world. And here in Africa, we still have issues about it. There's no such a theme of fighting poverty. And here in Africa, we know poverty. We have seen its ugliest face here. It is the biggest challenge of our generation, is this war on poverty and hunger. You cannot fight poverty in any other way than by creating wealth. You only create wealth through entrepreneurship, through business, and that requires investment. Unfortunately, capital is as shy as a deer. You scare it, and it runs. You cannot lure investment to an uncertain, unpredictable environment. This is why we simply don't understand here in South Africa that in Davos at the World Economic Forum, our president can say to the world, we are open for business. Please come and invest here. And 3 days later, back in South Africa, he announces that he has signed an act which allows for expropriation at nil compensation, making it possible for any tier of government, whether national or provincial or even local authorities, to expropriate within the ambit of the Constitution, of course. But our Constitution does not guarantee market-related compensation in expropriation. Our Constitution's Article 25(3) says that government or the state is allowed to take certain discounts. For example, for the use of the property, for the historical use of the property, for the history of acquisition, for historical investment by the state through subsidies for fencing or for drilling boreholes, for example, on the property. And then most important, for the purpose of the expropriation, whether it is for a public purpose or a public interest, such as land reform. But our Constitution does not say how much. Is the state allowed to take a 5% discount or a 15% discount or a 50 or 80% discount? That we need to establish through court case upon court case to give content to it. Fortunately, our Constitution also does not prohibit market-related compensation. And that is what we are fighting for. We are asking all the time, what is wrong with paying a landowner what is due to him when you expropriate him, whether for a public purpose or in public interest? Why should an individual carry the burden for a national imperative? In what kind of democracy do you expect an individual landowner to cough up for the responsibility of the state? The money for land reform should come from the fiscus. All of society should be paying for that. And in any way, on which basis would be decided whose number would come up to be expropriated at less than market-related values?
Well, that's because, of course, Theo, this argument has been turned on its head. It's been turned into a historical dispossession argument rather than land restitution argument. This is an argument that's become increasingly racialized and racist in many respects. So what you're seeing now is that, these are this stereotype and this broad brush painted over white South Africans in general, 2.8 million of whom identify in the Afrikaner community, and another 2 million other white South Africans, but they're being labeled with this brush as being land thieves and stealing. It starts with Malema years ago pushing this nonsense, and then the Black Land First movement. Now the ANC itself is doing this, and MK Party. All these parties are spewing racial hatred and demonizing people. The bottom line here is that the history of humanity is that people are in one place, they get too large, overstrip the resources, and or they have disputes, and some of that party moves away, settles somewhere else. Years later, groups come in contact, they often come in conflict, and then people move around the planet. We have colonized the whole planet, we've settled the whole planet, and groups come into conflict from time to time. Conquest, while it's not desirable, is a legitimate means of political discourse, an unfortunate one. And so you have to be reasonable about this. I mean, if we're going to make these arguments about, well, the land was stolen, but it wasn't stolen from you, but it was stolen from my people. Well, who are your people? We're all Homo sapiens, so are we not all the same people? And let's be serious about it. I mean, we hear the story about Palestine. Well, the Jews were there 5,000 years years ago. So is it theirs? My ancestors owned Ireland, and they were kicked out by the English. So is it mine? My ancestors also owned parts of Eastern Europe, which are now Poland. Do I get those back? I mean, you have to be reasonable here. There isn't a single person that I'm aware of in South Africa today who has stolen land that is currently a farmer. That all those people either inherited it legitimately or purchased it on their own. And that's one of the big lies about Zimbabwe. And I tell this over and over again. I've been telling this since 2000. According to the Commercial Farmers Union data, which I followed back then, the 1990s, in 2000, if I got my figures correct, because it's been a while now, so I might get rusty with the old age here, but I think it was 42% of all commercial farmland had been sold at least once in Zimbabwe since Mugabe became the prime minister in 1980 and then president in 1988. And so over a 20-year period, almost half the farmland that the government itself designated as commercial farmland in Zimbabwe have been sold at least once. And some of those holdings sold 2, 3, 4 times because people do that for speculative reasons and other reasons. So 38% of the commercial farmers in Zimbabwe in the year 2000 had begun farming in Zimbabwe after 1980 when Mugabe came in power. And the lie was told, these are the settler columns who stole our land in the 1890s, these white racists. And we're seeing this here. I have some guy here in the U.S. who knows nothing about South Africa, a black guy, talking about all these racist white South Africans. This is very dangerous and also very inaccurate. I've met racists who are black, white, and brown, and they're pretty scary people. Most people I know really don't care about that. They just care about raising their family, being successful, being able to worship in the way they please, and protecting their cultural heritage and being peaceful. So this is a very dangerous situation that's being exacerbated by politicians for a populist reason. The ANC is wildly unpopular. It has failed in every aspect of governance. It has become a typical African liberation movement that is incapable of governing once it takes over, become rapacious kleptocrats who steal everything but the kitchen sink. And in the ANC's case, they're stealing the kitchen sink too. So my point here is that it's a very dangerous slope that we're on, and I think that it's a very inflammable situation right now. Would you have any points of dispute there? Would you agree or disagree with my take on what's happening about this being taken from a legitimate land issue, which still exists to some degree, it still needs to be addressed, but it's being turned into a racial argument, and white South Africans become the demons by political actors, and that is spreading all around. We see in Shisheho, in Limpopo, have been land grabs 2 weeks ago, and their excuse was the president said we could, the law is passed, we are expropriating, and we're confident that the municipality of Polokwane will come around and deliver services. Yikes. Anyway, any thoughts on that one?
I am an Afrikaner. My family, or my ancestor, came here in 1686. I'm a 12th generation Afrikaner, 10th generation, but the 12th generation is also already around. How far can you turn back time? In our restitution program, you can file a land claim for land you have lost because of race-based actions or laws after the 13th of July 1913, because that's when the first Land Act moved certain black tribes from certain lands. Before that, more land was exchanged, or more people were evicted from lands in intertribal wars than in any other mechanism. How far can you turn back time? I have 42 land claims on my farm in the Limpopo. 42 is better than one. If I had only one, I would have probably been in trouble. But I know that government will spend more than my lifetime to figure out who the rightful claimant is. Because about 15 kilometers from my farm, there was a chief, Mashuti, who had 6 sons. And they fought each other for rainmaking medicines. And today, they are being celebrated as the origin of new tribes. And all of them claim that their ancestors hunted or gathered wood on my farm. Those 6, all of them claimed my farm too. They are not the problem. They had 14 sisters. And those sisters all married into different tribes, and their daughters married into different tribes, and their daughters married into different tribes. And today there are more than 100 entities who can claim that they have some kind of right on my farm. And if one of them is right, all of them are right. So where do you take the farm to now? Next door in Zimbabwe, when the land reform started, the land, they did not decide that we are now going to expropriate land without compensation. It happened the way in which the recent Polokwane land invasions happened 2 weeks ago, as you described it. A wild bunch of people just occupied the land, claiming that it is now theirs. And Mugabe, having just lost a referendum, he had a very simple choice. Either he tried to maintain law and order and the rule of law and estrange his own support base, or he must get onto this tiger and ride it. And this is what he did. He only changed the constitution 5 years later. This is our biggest threat in South Africa, that wild bunches might just go and occupy land and the state might do nothing about it. These actions is not only detrimental to commercial agriculture, it also robs a new generation of black farmers of the opportunity to grow into this new class of profitable farmers. It causes a lot of uncertainty and tension. And we just need to stick to the law. Even when it comes to land reform, let's just stick to the law. We have good laws in place. If they would be executed in the right way, who are the beneficiaries? In Zimbabwe, it's no use you go to court because judges were the first to receive land. Let me tell you, the programs in South Africa for land reform has been designed for nepotism and fraud and looting. When government says that only 6% of land claimants opt for the land in restitution, the rest want financial compensation. You pay 100 or 150 rand and you get to that list of beneficiaries. And there's a freebie. You will be paid for land which you have claimed that your great-great-great-grandfathers lost. And nobody is checking it. There's no verification for that. It is just another milking cow for cadres to benefit from. We are fighting more land cases in our organization where beneficiaries of the redistribution program, the so-called proactive land acquisition strategy beneficiaries, where they lease land from government, get chucked off the land after 5 or 10 years when the lease expires to make way for the deputy mayor or for the wife of one of the town councillors, than we are for white farmers who are under threat. There's nothing in this program which is really aimed at empowering this new generation of farmers. This is why our call is for land reform rather to be managed by an independent agency, an agency that stands arm's length away from the realpolitik where political parties need to score points.
Oh, sorry. I just one of my viewers was asking for me not to forget a question. I don't see the question. I see his comment about skills transfer, things like that. So I didn't see the question. Apologies for that. So yeah, I got a couple points here for you, and then we'll move on to talk about President Trump and the executive order before we wrap up. I don't want to keep you all day. You've probably got some macadamia nuts you've got to tend to today. But okay, so first off, 12 generations, that's impressive, but I've got you beat. My first ancestor to come to America was Sir Francis Wyatt, the first royal governor of the Jamestown colony of Virginia in 1621. So we are the OGs, the original gangsters. We got you beat. You're off for Connors. I've been here for a long time. But nobody is giving me Virginia, the Tidewater country, because we once owned all of it. Anyway, as far as the land, these land invasions have been going on since 94, even before that they tried, but the government kept in check. The ANC government since 94 is always moved to evict squatters and land, those who try to take over land for the most part, particularly when it's state-owned land, they'll do it. In fact, in Johannesburg, they call out the Red Ants who remove people forcibly and beat them in conjunction with Johannesburg Metro Police Department. It's really shameful what they do. But they dismantle informal settlements all the time, including during COVID, when people weren't allowed to move around, they ripped down their shacks. In Zimbabwe, what happened, you mentioned the referendum, and I've been telling people this for over 25 years, and no one wants to listen, not many anyway. People don't realize that in Zimbabwe, the white farmers in Zimbabwe, and the black commercial farmers too, about 350 of them, thought they actually lived in a democracy. They actually believe that, many of them. And some of them, because of their frustration of the government forcing them to sell their maize, for example, at below market prices to the Grain Marketing Board, which was run by the government, and then the government made the money, the difference between what they paid the farmer, who went deeper in debt to borrow money because they didn't get the market price. They had to sell it to the government, and then the government sells in the market, and they pocket the difference. That's one of the dirty secrets no one talks about. But because of that situation, a lot of farmers were frustrated that the economy was being paralyzed by the rapacious kleptocrats of the ZANU-PF. And so some of them became open members and supporters of the Movement for Democratic Change, a party founded by Morgan Tsvangirai and Roy Bennett, of course. A commercial farmer was a big member of that. Both have passed on. Morgan from cancer, sadly, and then Roy Bennett, he and his wife, tragically in a helicopter crash in Mexico while on holiday. But those two guys, Movement for Democratic Change, a lot of commercial farmers started backing that organization openly, because you're allowed to. And Mugabe had put a referendum in place in 1999 in which he wanted to amalgamate powers in the chief executive and basically make himself a dictatorial head of state where the parliament is a rubber stamp, kind of like it was in the last years of apartheid. The parliament was just a rubber stamp for the executive. And that's what he wanted. And he had never lost anything ever since he became, prime minister in 1980. Everything he wanted, he got. Well, MDC, the Move for Democratic Change, they lobbied for people not to vote for that referendum. And he lost. He lost. And Mugabe took it personally, and he took his revenge out on commercial farmers, the white farmers, because he said, I was magnanimous. I let you stay here. And this is how you treat me. You betrayed me. You stabbed me in the back. And that's one of the reasons why the land invasions were allowed to happen. And if you look at every single farmer who was targeted in 2000 initial stages, Martin Olds, David Stevenson, every one of them was a member openly or a supporter of the MDC. But then it spiraled out of control. And this, of course, you've alluded to, is the danger in South Africa. This can spiral out of control, and it can go so quick. So I think that's something that people need to realize, that what just happened in Shisheho could happen in Northwest, in Gauteng, in the Western Cape, and it's very hard to stop it. And you've got to wonder what exactly ANC is trying to accomplish here, because they're not going to get back the voters that they've irritated, and they're not going to get them back from MK, not as long as Jacob Zuma's around. He's got a cult of personality. He's going to keep that 15% and growing of that electorate. So I'm not really sure what they're hoping to achieve here, because the elections aren't until 26, 27 for municipality. And in the meantime, it just almost seems like it's just a revenge-based thing. It's our turn to eat. And, I don't know. Any thoughts on that? The Red Ants, Zimbabwe, what I said about that? Anything you think I might have gotten wrong?
Yeah, you stopped your story in Zimbabwe short, Chris. Between 2000 and 2008, the farmers were evicted from their farms. It was legalized since 2005. And then a number of the farmers took their government to the SAAI Tribunal, our regional court in Windhoek. And then on the 29th of November 2008, the case was heard and the farmers won their case. The tribunal actually gave a very damning judgment against the Zimbabwean government, saying that this really pushes in against all the values of the SADC agreement. But instead of rectifying it, the SADC heads of state then decided to disband that tribunal. And we are currently in a court case in Botswana, trying to force them to reopen the doors of justice for 400 million citizens of SAAI countries. In the meantime, we have registered that case in South African law and pushed it further here. We also discovered that there was a cost order attached to it, and on the basis of that cost order, we ended up selling off some of the immovable assets of the Zimbabwean embassy in Cape Town. Now, in one of our court cases, in November 2 years ago, our constitutional court said that that tribunal is not really closed. SADC heads of state needed a 2/3 majority to close this institution, and they did not have it. They had only 9 out of the 16 votes. They needed 11. Hence, they thought that they would be able to lobby 2 more countries to support it, but the opposite happened. The Law Society of Tanzania challenged their president giving his signature under this decision, and they won that case, and he was forced to remove his signature. And also here in South Africa, we challenged our president. Actually, President Ramaphosa was then forced to remove the signature of former President Zuma. So now they have only 7 out of the 16, which amounts to less than 44%. So our constitutional court said that tribunal is still open. It only needs judges to be appointed there. The moment we have access to justice again, we will of course push both in Zimbabwe and in South Africa against this kind of expropriation act and try to bring a balance between the interests of the state and the interests of the individual. Now, many people say that we are on the same trajectory in South Africa as our colleagues in Zimbabwe. I firmly believe that we are not. We have a few things here which Zimbabwe does not have. Some of them they never had. And the most important one is that we have an example right on our doorstep on how not to do things. And I know that the argument is dependent on whether a majority of people in South Africa still have soft ears for the voice of reason. Now, I believe with every cell in my body that we do have that. Because if a majority of people in South Africa did not have soft ears for the voice of reason, then we never had a future here in Africa. I refuse to accept that. I refuse to accept that there is no place for white people in Africa to be true Africans. I view myself as being made from this soil. And although I deeply appreciate the offer of President Trump for Afrikaners to come to the USA, I will not go. I will not go myself. I hope to be around, even if the last straw burns down in this country, and I will try to put out that fire. But I also know there are many people who feel that they've reached the end of the road. Only this weekend, I spoke to a farmer who lost his family in 2 farm attacks. In the first one, he lost his daughter and his mother. And in the second farm attack, his wife was murdered. And he says, there is no future for me here. I want to go. Now, who am I to say to him, don't go? Of course, every farmer who leaves, whether it is for the USA or anywhere else in the world, for us, it is a loss. We don't want that. But how do you tell a young man who walks here into our office and say, I've been a farmer. I grew up on a farm. My father sold our farm in the land claims process, and with what he got for our farm, he was able to pay the cooperative and the bank. And he does not really have enough to survive or to carry him through his retirement years. But I want to farm. And I've been at all the major banks. And I've even been to the state-owned land bank. But there is no financing mechanism for me to buy a farm and the equipment to be a farmer. This year, just more than 16,000 young South Africans will go to the USA again to work on farms. And I cannot tell you how we appreciate these opportunities for them. And in the USA on farms, they are being exposed to the latest technologies, both in equipment and also the latest models of production management. And they come back richer in knowledge, but also with the kind of capital they need to launch their careers. We don't have those opportunities for them yet. And I'm pretty sure that if those opportunities open for them in the USA, they will grab it. Because how can you tell a young man with stars in his eyes of becoming a farmer that you're not allowed to grab this opportunity? Who am I to do that? This morning, a Zimbabwean called me. I know him well. He lives in Harare. He's now destitute. He lost everything. He said to me, I was 25 years old. I farmed with my dad for 3 or 4 years before we lost the farm. But I have since lost 25 years. I've lost a lifetime. Our country have lost a generation of farmers. Can't you speak to the government in the USA to open up that opportunity for us too? Because I still feel that I have another 15 or 20 years of farming in me. Or should I sit here in Harare hoping and praying that we will be compensated in our lifetime? And I don't think it will happen. I can't see Zimbabwe getting their hands on the kind of funding they need to compensate the farmers now, even although they have signed this global compensation deed. So I cannot get myself so far as to stand in the way of people who would take up this offer. But I'm praying every morning and every evening that as many as possible, not only of the current farmers, but also the new generation of farmers, will have those opportunities right here on home soil. My dream is a dream of still seeing the youngsters blooming into some of the most competitive farmers in the world. And as South Africans, you may think that it is arrogant, but we do see ourselves as farmers in the first league, being able to compete both in terms of quality and price on the shelves of shops in the USA and in Europe. And I would love to still be able to claim that in another 20 years from now.
Well, that's well said. Folks, a little admin stuff here because we're going to get close to wrapping up here. Otherwise, we'd probably talk for days and we'll both probably fall asleep eventually because this is a pretty big topic. Please, if you're not a subscriber, become a subscriber to the channel. The more subscribers you have, the more interaction you make, the comments in chat, the comments you put in the video afterwards, all of that, likes or dislikes if you so inclined, all help feed the algorithm to get people to come to the channel. We've been a channel that's been consigned to the dustbin by the censorship at YouTube for years and have just broken out of that nonsense, and we've almost doubled the size of this channel in the past 2 or 3 weeks, which is shocking to me, to say the least. So I try to address all the people in the chat, but during interviews that's impossible, so I get to what I can. I have not forgotten the Congo Chris question. We'll get to that shortly before we wrap up, but I did want to touch back on what you said, Theo. I was, for the sake of brevity, I didn't tell the entire Zimbabwe story. What you're referring to, of course, is Mike Campbell and the Ben Freeth case that went for the SAAI tribunal, in which the white farmer defeated Robert Mugabe. But even when you win in the courts, nothing comes of it. Mike Campbell sadly died a few years after that from injuries sustained when he was nearly beaten to death on his farm. And his son-in-law, Ben Freeth, still lives today in Zimbabwe and travels the world to make people aware of the horrors that happened in Zimbabwe. It's pretty sad. Folks, you can join me on Twitter at WMWChris. One of the mods might put that up there. Please join me on Twitter. Also subscribe here. Really appreciate it. And you can also, on the screen once again, if you want to learn more about SAAI or join it or participate or support it, There is the URL on the screen right there. You can see that. By the way, if you're wondering where that picture is, that is one of my favorite places in all of South Africa. That is the Mahalisburg. And actually, that is just west of the Hartbeespoort Dam. That photograph I took right there when I was there in August 2022. One of my favorite photographs. You can see the scrubland and the bushes growing in the Mahalisburg in the distance, and a very typical high-veld savanna there. I know that Theo lives in the low-veld, but I'm kind of partial to the high-veld. But anyway, so let's you segued very nicely into the piece I want to talk about for Donald Trump. And I want to say this very quickly, just to shout out about a whole bunch of stuff here. Folks, I would really appreciate if the Afrikaner, the Boer, the Afrikaans speaking community would not be the typical group of Afrikaners. When I get 10 of you together, I get 12 leaders and 27 ideas on how to move forward. Please stop. Yeah, please. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I? If I'm honest, so what I ask for South Africans is patience, calm, and also do not attack groups like SAAI or others if you think they are speaking for you. We've heard very clearly, very articulately here that Theo de Jager is not trying to speak for everyone. He's representing an organization, has members, and he has very eloquently gave his thoughts on it. My thoughts are the same. I am heart sore that South Africans would feel the need to leave South Africa, but I fully understand the situation. I know thousands of South Africans, many of whom who find themselves in these circumstances. I also know other people who've done quite well under the situation. And so it's heartbreaking. And people don't understand. I've lived in 16 countries and lived abroad for a fair portion of my life, including in 8 countries in Africa, and worked in 38 of them. And I've seen poverty up close and personal. I've lived in poverty as a kid. So what disturbs me is that the grass is greener. For people who are desperate, I understand it, and that offer is going to be there for you. But do not tarnish or attack people who are saying, like, there's a lot of people dumping on AfriForum and Solidarity. I think it's unfair. I watched the interview that people were asking me to watch, or the press conference. I don't interpret AfriForum or Solidarity saying, well, we're not going and we encourage our people not to go. I didn't hear that. That's what you heard in your mind. That's not what was stated, and that's also not what's stated here. So I please ask you for honesty in your own mind about what's happening here. So we've covered a lot of ground here. You've just segued into the Donald Trump situation, and your letter, I think, is amazing. If you go to the interview, or not the interview, to the letter video, which is on my channel, if one of the mods could put that up right now, that link to that video, what that is me reading his letter with a little bit of my commentary behind it, an open letter to President Donald Trump in which he expresses his thoughts. I think it's the best thing I've seen yet on it. And I think you should check that out. But the link is there. You can find that on Facebook. It was the only place I could find it. Please check it out. Look, President Trump, I didn't agree with everything he did. I think that he probably should have talked about minorities being racially discriminated in South Africa, which includes coloreds and Indians, and also small ethnic groups of blacks are being discriminated for different reasons. So I think he should have done that. And also the term Afrikaner is not defined. So we've got all kinds of open questions. We'll get to those things, and we'll hear a policy coming. If you feel the need or desire to come to America on the basis of this refugee resettlement program, then more power to you. You're welcome to come here because it's a legitimate program. Unfortunately, that program has been abused wildly by the Biden administration. And on the 20th of January, his first day in office, President Trump suspended the refugee resettlement program. On Friday night, his executive order reopened it to a certain group of people, and it's yet to be defined what those group are as Afrikaners. So if you are going to come here, more power to you. And there is, we don't care about your jobs. We don't care about your skills. We don't care if you're 92 or 2. It does not matter. Refugee is someone who's persecuted, either suffered persecution or fears persecution based on a list of categories. And there is a resettlement program. The U.S. government helps you get to where you're going. And yes, apparently you can even bring your pets when you do this. So don't start putting down your pets, that sort of thing. But for the vast majority of South Africans, we're not going to take up this offer. I have great respect for you, for your love of your homeland, for your patriotism. I share it. It's an amazing place. Theo, any more thoughts about President Trump's offer and what it means? You're not taking up on it, but you do appreciate it. So any final thoughts? I'm getting a little choked up.
Yes. President Trump is really shaking up the world. He says he's going to do something and then he doesn't. And that's a rare quality amongst politicians. We are not really used to that. What is important for us is that in this shake-up, we get to the roots of the problems. And the roots of the problem in South Africa is not the racial divide. It is got nothing to do with the fact that we are a world in one country, both in terms of the geography and the various cultures. You cannot attribute it to any single cultural, racial, religious group. The problems here comes from poor governance, poor policy environment, looting, state capture, and I don't need even to name it. It's all there in the Zondo Commission report. When it comes to land reform, we have a similar report, the report by former President Kgalema Motlanthe, a high-level report on what went wrong on land reform, and it was tabled at the presidency already in 2018. But with both these reports, the problem is that nothing happened afterwards. There are no consequences. This is at the root of our problem. We need to get handles on law and order again. The law needs to work again. I have been to 44 countries in Africa, and also there are today South African farmers and Zimbabwean farmers farming in 44 other countries in Africa. They have mostly diversified the operations into other African countries. But I have seen what the lack of law can do. It's impossible later to transact if there are no consequences after a case in court. Hence, the pressure from the USA, and similarly from elsewhere in the world, from all nations who cherish the rule of law and our agreement amongst humans as embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all those who treasure that. It's now time to put on the pressure to make sure that also in Africa, we can hold decision makers responsible and accountable. That should be the very foundation of our democracies. This is what we are lacking. This is why Africa is poor. And I think now that President Trump moved into the White House, we have the best opportunity in many years to get that right. Because the USA matters, even for those who think that we can live in isolation. If anybody can shake it up to the point where we can have a fundamental restructuring of governance, not only here, also elsewhere in the world, I believe it's the Trump administration, and I hope for that.
Well, indeed, the Trumpster can do it. Okay, you've got me beaten there, Theo. You came up with something. I've got you 1621 Vice when your 12 generations arrived. You got me beat. I've only worked in 38 countries in Africa. You got 44, so you win that one. All right. So just we're going to wrap up here, but there was a question in Super Chat earlier from Congo Chris. But before I get the question, someone asked me, he said, I should have Rob Hersoff on the program. Well, I spoke to Rob Hersoff this morning and asked him back on the program. He's been on my program recently, and we've been trying to get him on for 5 years, but he had other things to do, and just contacted me, and he asked to come on my program. Rob was on the program. Do a search on my channel if you're new here. You'll find the conversation. Rob is currently traveling, and we spoke this morning, and he will probably be on this program again this Friday. Tomorrow, David Ansar from the Free Market Foundation will be on. I'm waiting to hear back from Franz Cronje. He'll be on the program this week. You're probably like, how does Chris know all these South Africans? Well, it turns out I do know a lot of folks in South Africa. So Rob Hersoff will be on the program. And before we do wrap up, I just want to say that Dr. De Jager, yes, and legend. Just want to let you know that. The words of Kurt Darren, I stole that, by the way. Yes, and legend. So not original. There was a question here from Congo Chris. How do we encourage agricultural skills transfer? I know it's a bit late in the discussion, but what can we do to encourage agricultural skills transfer? I think it starts with education, but any thoughts on that, and then we'll wrap up, okay?
Yes. I have very strong opinions about this. In SAAI, we spend most of our resources and our time on youth development. All the students' organizations, all the agricultural faculty organizations are also part of SAAI on Stellenbosch, at the University of Pretoria, at the University of Free State. For us, it is not enough to recruit more youngsters into this profession. We want to recruit the brightest young minds to choose agriculture as a career. That's the only way you can maintain your competitiveness. And then we must be very cautious on what kind of skills we transfer. Because the world is changing so fast and the technology in our industry is changing so fast. Communication technology is changing so fast. We need to make sure that we train them for those skills which will enable them to still be competitive farmers in another decade or two from now. And if you would allow me a very small anecdote, when my father is a very curious man, and when he visits me on the farm, he would also always snoop around. He wants to see how I treat the tools he gave me, and he would get into the roof to see what is in there. And one day I came down from the mountain, from my plantations, and I saw there was a baby pram on the yard. And he came out of the house and he said, "Look what I found. Do you recognize it?" And I said, "No, Dad. It was not ours. I bought this farm with this pram in the roof. I only see it now." And he said, "But you were raised in exactly the same model." I said, "But I cannot remember that. How should I remember that?" He said, "What you should remember is when you went to school, I took off the wheels and I made you a cart, one which you steered with a rope. And you used to go down the street and then crash it into the palisade at the railway line, and then had to carry it back uphill so that I can fix it in the evening when I came back from work." And I said, "I remember that part. I remember the grass burns on my elbows and my knees." I said, "But look at my son today. He's playing the same kinds of games, but he sits in front of a screen and he plays it with an Xbox. And then my dad said to me, whilst I thought he would have sympathy, he said, "You leave my grandson alone. He's playing on the screen to hone his skills for the kind of machinery he will one day need to manage on a farm. You had to hone your skills on that cart with a rope. Life is changing, and we need to change the way we train the new generations of farmers, whether in schools, colleges, or universities, and even in the workplace."
Well, excellent and well stated. Thanks for answering that question. More questions coming now, but we're going to have to wrap up here, folks. I'll invite Dr. De Jager to come back on the program if you'd like to talk more about this, because a lot is unfolding as we sit here. The American Embassy put out a statement today on its website about this. Someone mentioned in the chat. I've seen that statement. It doesn't say a whole lot, doesn't give us any more clarity. I would caution that people just be patient. But thank you for those wise thoughts and that anecdotal story. That actually puts some, when I was a kid, I learned English in high school. One of my teachers talked about, when you put stories in or you put anecdotal things, she called it flavoring particles. I've never forgotten that phrase. They're flavoring particles. It makes the meal much more tasty and interesting. So thank you for the flavoring particles. And I want to thank you very, very much, Bye Bye Donkey, for being my guest today, and also for knowing who I was. It's fascinating to me because Ronaldo Khos, of course, from Port Elizabeth, before I came back to South Africa after the COVID scam in 2022, he says, "Chris, everybody knows who you are. You're known everywhere. You don't have no idea what you did for people during lockdown, and people really, really, really enjoyed your comment." Like, okay, I'm kind of a humble person at heart. I'm like, okay, he's blowing smoke up my skirt. But then everywhere I go in South Africa, people are just so wonderful, and people recognize me in the street. And, the fact that you actually knew who I was kind of surprised me. I didn't know that. But to be fair, I do make an effort to engage with the agricultural community of South Africa. I've spoken in Zeerust to commercial farmers, about 150 of them, a couple years ago. I've also interviewed the head of the then Macadamia Association, Liesel Pretorius, trying to tell a good news story about South Africa. Macadamia nuts is a good news story. It's gone from virtually no industry to being the world's largest producer and exporter, overtaking Australia, which had overtaken the U.S. And so that's good news for South Africa. And also a field where a lot of non-traditional In other words, not old white guys are the farmers. You got women and black folks doing it as well. And I've interviewed the head of the Poultry Association and many others, so, and the wine industry. So anyway, I just want to say that it's a pleasure, and I'm really surprised you knew who I was, and I'm grateful that you agreed to come on. You were welcome to come back on the program anytime if you've got a message you want to share with people. And I'll just give you a chance for any final thoughts. And when you're done, I'll ask you to just drop off and then hang on for a few minutes so you and I can do some post-interview just for about 2 or 3 minutes, wrap up. Anyway, so Dr. de Jager, bye-bye, donkey, Kealoboa. We really appreciate it. And any final thoughts from you for the audience out there of listeners in South Africa and around the world? The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Each and every one of you will, in a few hours from now, have your meal. For some it will be lunch, and for some it will be dinner. And when you do, spare a thought for the farmer behind that meal. Farming is not a soft job. There's no such a thing as a lazy farmer. A lazy farmer is an ex-farmer. Spare a thought of what it takes to get good quality, healthy food on your plate.
Well, there you go. That was very succinct and very well said. Thank you for that, Dr. de Jager. I'm going to let you drop off. Just don't leave the link very quickly so we can chat afterwards. Appreciate that. All right, folks. Dr. Theo de Jager from SAAI. And this is, I hope it's been very informative for you all. I know that I've enjoyed the conversation, and we appreciate him being here. So thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. Be sure to like the program. If you don't mind, if you dislike it, that's fine. That's your prerogative. Leave a comment behind the video as well afterwards, if you don't mind. The link for the organization will be below the video, as well as the link is there for the letter. You can go check that out if you want to check out his open letter to President Trump. And thank you all. Please remember that he's making no claim to speak for all Afrikaners, for all South Africans, or even for all farmers. And I don't think that AfriForum or Solidarity have done the same thing. A lot of people are I think, beating them up unfairly. I can't help but wonder if it's an organized propaganda campaign being financed by dark interest, but that's my thoughts on it. All right, folks, I'll be back with the news, but not at the top of the hour. I need to take a break after this and get organized. So we'll have a late start for the news today, probably about 6:30 South Africa time. So in about an hour, we'll do the news. Come back in for that, and we'll see you there. To everyone's been here for the super chats, thank you for that. God bless everybody. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you back here shortly on Chris Wyatt Reports. Be safe out there. And as everybody keeps telling you, don't trust the comrades. Don't trust communists. Trust me, I spent my entire life defeating communists. They're not people you want to hang it with. God bless.